My parents gave my sister a down payment for a house, then told me, "You are independent, you'll figure it out." So I did, and bought a house twice the size. When they asked if they could stay with me, I just smiled and said, "Figure it out." I always knew I wasn't the favorite, but I don't think it really hit me until I was in my 30s, sitting across from my parents at my younger sister's housewarming party, listening to them gush over how grown-up Jamie had become. She had just gotten married to a sweet, quiet guy named Mark, and they were now the proud owners of a 3-bedroom house in a nice suburban neighborhood with a fenced yard and a stupid little mailbox that looked like a red barn. You know the type, picture perfect and nauseating in its wholesomeness. The evening air was warm as I nursed my third beer, watching my mother fuss over Jamie's new curtains while my father clapped Mark on the shoulder, no doubt offering some sage advice about home ownership. I'd driven 40 minutes to be here, brought an expensive bottle of wine I couldn't really afford, and somehow still felt like an intruder in this family celebration. My parents had helped them move in over the past week, something I learned about after the fact through a casual text from Jamie. "Mom and Dad are saints," she'd written, alongside a photo of our father on a stepladder hanging shelves. They'd helped paint the living room walls a soft sage green that Jamie had agonized over for weeks, texting me swatches with names like Peaceful Meadow and Misty Morning as if I had any opinion that would matter. They even paid for the fridge and the washer-dryer set as an early Christmas present. They're practically furnishing the whole place. Jamie had told me over the phone, her voice bubbly with gratitude. And then they gave them the biggest gift of all, a check for $60,000 toward the down payment. Not a loan, not something to be paid back over time with modest interest. A gift. Just like that. Money that could have funded a small business or paid for a master's degree or covered years of rent, handed over without hesitation, without question. But then again, Jamie was always the golden girl from the day she was born. I was 5 when she came into our lives, and I still remember the way my mom looked at her like she was something holy, something precious. Before Jamie, I'd been an only child, not spoiled, exactly, but accustomed to my parents' undivided attention. After Jamie, I became the eldest, the responsible one, the one who should know better. My mother used to joke that Jamie was her miracle baby, as if I had been some kind of practice run, a first draft to be improved upon. "We weren't sure we could have another after you," she'd say, stroking Jamie's hair. "The doctors told us it might not happen." But then our little miracle came along. Our bedrooms told the story clearly enough. Mine was functional, a twin bed with plain blue sheets, a desk for homework, bookshelves filled with volumes bought at library sales. Jamie's was a showcase, canopy bed with ruffled curtains, custom wallpaper with tiny pink roses, and a collection of dolls that cost more than my first car. "Your sister needs the extra space," my father would explain when I pointed out the obvious disparity. "She has so many things." I was the one who got the hand-me-downs, clothes from cousins and neighbors, shoes worn at the heels. I had to get a part-time job at 16 stocking shelves at the local grocery store, trudging home after school smelling like cleaner and cardboard, while Jamie was given a brand new Honda Civic the day she got her license, pearl white with leather seats and a sunroof. "She needs something safe," my mother said when I pointed out that I'd been driving a rusted Corolla with a passenger door that wouldn't open from the inside. The double standard continued through high school like some kind of cruel joke. I brought home A's on my report card, perfect scores on standardized tests, academic awards that I arranged neatly on my desk. They told me not to brag, not to make others feel bad about their own achievements. "Not everyone finds school as easy as you do, Ethan," my mother would say, as if my grades were some kind of accident of birth rather than the result of late nights and highlighted textbooks. Meanwhile, Jamie brought home a C- in algebra and they celebrated like she'd cured cancer, taking her out for ice cream and praising her effort. "She really tried this time," my father would say, beaming with pride. That's what matters. When she got caught shoplifting makeup from the mall in her junior year, expensive lipstick and designer mascara she absolutely didn't need, they called it a phase, a momentary lapse in judgment. My father laughed it off at family dinner. "Teenage girls, am I right?" he said, winking at my mother. "Remember when you stole that bracelet from your sister's jewelry box?" But when I stayed out late with friends after a football game, coming home at midnight instead of 11, they called me irresponsible, grounded me for 2 weeks. "We expected better from you," my father said, disappointment heavy in his voice. "You're supposed to set an example." Still, I told myself it would balance out in the long run. That eventually, my hard work would be recognized, that the scales would tip in my favor. I went to college on scholarships I had to fight for tooth and nail, writing essays late into the night, interviewing with alumni, filling out application after application until my fingers cramped. Meanwhile, Jamie got to float through community college, changing her major 3 times in 2 years before eventually dropping out because it wasn't a good fit. My parents nodded sympathetically when she announced her decision over Sunday dinner. "College isn't for everyone," my father said, passing her the mashed potatoes. "You'll find your path." I moved out at 22 with a marketing degree and worked 2 jobs just to afford a 1-bedroom apartment in a sketchy neighborhood with mold in the ceiling and neighbors who fought loudly at 3 in the morning. Jamie stayed home until she was 28, living rent-free in her childhood bedroom, working part-time at a boutique downtown where she got an employee discount on clothes she modeled on Instagram. Jamie's saving up, my mother would tell relatives at Christmas, as if living expense-free at nearly 30 was some kind of financial strategy rather than prolonged adolescence. And when she finally moved out, it wasn't to struggle through apartment living like the rest of us. No, it was straight into a house, a real house with a yard and a 2-car garage, that my parents helped her buy. At that housewarming party, I was the only one who brought a gift that wasn't bought with someone else's money. I'd researched for weeks, wanting to find something meaningful despite my limited budget. I gave them a framed print of a map of the city where they met, a thoughtful, handmade thing I'd found from a local artist who customized it with their names and the date they first crossed paths at a mutual friend's birthday party. I'd spent nearly $300 on it, money I should have put toward my credit card debt. Everyone else just showed up with gift cards or bottles of wine or nothing at all, walking in with empty hands and leaving with full plates. And yet, my mom barely even looked at my gift before setting it down next to a stack of envelopes, her attention already back on Jamie, asking if the couch we were sitting on was new or if they'd brought it from her old apartment. "It's new," Jamie said, running her hand over the soft gray fabric. "We couldn't fit my old one through the front door, so Mom and Dad helped us pick this one out last weekend." Another gift I hadn't heard about. Another example of their generosity that somehow never extended to me. Later that night, after most of the guests had left and the pizza boxes had been folded for recycling, I found myself sitting with my parents on the back porch, the three of us sipping wine while Jamie and Mark cleaned up inside. The string lights Jamie had hung from the pergola cast a soft glow over the newly laid pavers. It was quiet, peaceful even, the kind of moment that makes you forget all the resentment you've been carrying. And then I asked it. I didn't mean to, but it just slipped out, like something that had been sitting at the back of my throat for years and finally found its way past my lips. "So," I said, swirling the cheap red wine in my glass, "do you think you'd be able to help me out the same way you helped Jamie? With a down payment, I mean. I've been looking at some places, and I've got some savings, but..." I let the sentence hang there, already regretting the vulnerability. They both looked at me like I had asked for a kidney. My father's face did this thing where his smile stays in place but his eyes go cold, like a light switching off behind frosted glass. My mother's mouth pinched at the corners, her lipstick creasing into little lines. My dad gave a little laugh, the kind of laugh people make when they're uncomfortable but also don't care enough to pretend otherwise. "Ethan," he said, setting his glass down on the wooden side table Jamie had proudly pointed out earlier, "I refinished it myself, only took 4 tries, you've always been independent. You'll figure it out." My mother nodded like that settled it, her earrings catching the light from the string lights. "You've always been the strong one," she added, as if strength was a convenient excuse for inequity. Strong. That's what they call you when they don't want to help you. When they want to let you drown, they tell you how good you are at swimming. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked down into my wine glass and smiled, that smile you make when someone slaps you and you pretend it didn't hurt. "You're right," I said after a moment, voice steady despite the churning in my gut. "I will." And that was the moment. Not the moment I decided to prove them wrong. I'd been doing that my whole life, bringing home perfect report cards and scholarships and promotions that were met with polite nods rather than celebration. No, this was different. This was the moment I realized that I would not ask again. Not them. Not anyone. I would figure it out, all right, but I wasn't going to forget. And I sure as hell wasn't going to forgive, because some things break in silence. Some betrayals come not with yelling or slamming doors, but with casual shrugs and backhanded compliments. And when they break you that quietly, you learn to rebuild yourself in the dark, brick by goddamn brick. The drive home from Jamie's that night was a blur of streetlights and angry music played too loud, the bass vibrating through my chest as I took corners too fast. I remember thinking about all the times I'd swallowed my pride, all the times I'd told myself that next time would be different, next time they would see me. When they told me to figure it out, they must have thought I'd come crawling back eventually, tail tucked and pride swallowed, maybe asking for a loan or a bit of mercy or some hand-me-down wisdom that I hadn't already taught myself 100 times over. But the truth is, I didn't crawl, I ran. And I didn't run for help. I ran for blood. There's something about being underestimated your whole life that creates a kind of pressure cooker under your ribs, a steady quiet rage that never fully switches off. Some people burn out from it, some implode, but not me. I built from it. I built quietly, like a storm that doesn't crack thunder until it's already overhead. I picked up a second job within 2 weeks of that housewarming party. I kept my main gig as a marketing manager for a mid-sized tech firm and added a weekend job bartending downtown at a place with sticky floors and entitled patrons who thought tipping was optional. I started freelance consulting on the side, building up small brands for startups too broke to hire big agencies, working until my eyes burned from staring at screens. My routine became mechanical, precise. Weekdays at the office from 8 to 6, home to microwave dinner and work on freelance projects until midnight. Fridays, I'd sleep for 4 hours before my shift at the bar, standing on my feet until 3 in the morning, smiling for tips through gritted teeth. Saturdays, back at the bar from 7 until close. Sundays, I'd recover for a few hours before opening my laptop again, preparing for Monday's meetings while finishing client work. I lived like a ghost. No dinners out. No vacation. No unnecessary purchases. I didn't buy coffee unless it was 50% off at the grocery store, a luxury I allowed myself once a week. I didn't replace my cracked phone screen for 2 whole years, just slapped on a cheap protector and ignored the spider web of fractures that distorted every text message. I patched my work shoes with duct tape on the inside so no one would notice the soles wearing thin. I drove a 10-year-old Toyota with a dent in the side where I'd been sideswiped in a parking lot. Insurance would have raised my rates, so I lived with it, and used a plastic bag duct taped to the frame to cover the passenger window when the motor died in winter. I knew all the tricks of someone living on the edge, which bills could be paid late without immediate consequences, which grocery stores had the best markdowns at the end of the day, which medications could be skipped when money got tight. But I saved. God, I saved like a damn hoarder saves junk mail and broken toasters. Every bonus, every tax refund, every unexpected windfall went straight into savings, untouched and accumulating. I opened a high-yield account and watched the numbers tick up with each deposit, small at first, then larger as I got better at juggling multiple income streams. I learned how to invest, not the flashy kind that promises overnight riches, but slow, boring, methodical index funds that grew like moss on stone. I studied market trends during lunch breaks, watching YouTube videos with the volume low so my coworkers wouldn't hear, reading articles about diversification and compound interest while eating microwaved rice and vegetables I'd meal prepped on my 4 hours off each week. I subscribed to newsletters that most people would find dry enough to kill a horse, poring over housing market analyses and interest rate predictions. I spoke with mortgage brokers who laughed when they saw my income to debt ratio, then changed their tune when they saw my credit score and savings rate. "You're an anomaly," one told me. "Most people with your income don't save like this." Most people with my income didn't have something to prove. Every dollar had a job. Every decision had a direction. I wasn't just trying to buy a home, I was trying to build a monument. A silent middle finger made out of wood, concrete, and stained glass. And I didn't tell a soul. Not my coworkers who invited me out for drinks I always declined. Not the few friends who eventually stopped calling when I missed one too many gatherings. Not the women I dated briefly before the relationship inevitably fizzled because I was too distant or always working. I kept my ambition close to my chest, a secret weapon I was honing in silence. Jamie didn't notice, of course. She was too busy living her best subsidized life. Mark got her pregnant barely a year into their marriage, and suddenly my parents had a grandchild to obsess over. The baby, a girl they named Lily, became the center of the family universe. My mother quit her part-time job to babysit 3 days a week. My father adjusted his work schedule to be there for doctor's appointments and milestone moments. I became a background character in their golden little sitcom, the uncle who sent gift cards on birthdays and Christmas, who showed up at family gatherings with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I got occasional calls, always surface level. "How's work?" My mother would ask, not really listening for the answer. "You dating anyone yet?" And then the inevitable shift in tone when I said I was still renting. "Well, don't wait too long, son. Home ownership is important. Important enough to bankroll for one kid, but not the other." They still thought I was treading water. I let them. Because the longer they believed I was flailing, the sweeter it would taste when they realized I'd already reached the shore, built a castle, and locked the damn gate. 3.5 years after that porch conversation, I closed on a house so far out of their league that I actually laughed out loud the first time I walked through it with my realtor. She thought I was expressing joy, and I was, in a way, but not the kind she understood. This was the laughter of vindication, of a plan long in the making finally coming to fruition. 5 bedrooms, 4 baths, with a primary suite that included a sitting area and a shower big enough for a small party. A kitchen with a double oven, quartz countertops that gleamed like polished stone under recessed lighting, and a pantry big enough to get lost in. Hardwood floors that glowed like honey in the morning sun, carrying through every room except the bathrooms, which featured heated tile that warmed your feet on cold mornings. The basement was finished with a home theater set up and a wet bar, complete with wine fridge and ice maker. A 3-car garage with built-in organization systems and epoxy floors. A backyard with a pergola and a built-in grill station that looked like something straight out of a magazine, overlooking a kidney-shaped pool with a waterfall feature. And the best part? It was located just 6 blocks from Jamie's house. Not by accident. I picked it on purpose, searching listings within a specific radius, waiting for the perfect property to come on the market. I didn't want something comparable to what she had, I wanted something that would make her house look like a starter home, something that would cast a shadow over her achievement both literally and figuratively. Not to flaunt. Just to let it be seen. Quietly. Naturally. Like karma on foot. I didn't throw a party. I didn't send photos. I didn't even post about it online, despite the social media specialist in me knowing exactly how to stage the perfect new home announcement that would generate maximum engagement. I moved in quietly, furnished it slowly with pieces I've been collecting and storing over the years, quality items bought at estate sales and auctions, classic pieces that would never go out of style. I went about my life like nothing had changed, still working my multiple jobs despite no longer needing the extra income, still driving my dented Toyota despite having a 3-car garage that could house vehicles 3 times its value. The only thing I did, the one indulgence I allowed myself, was to keep the windows open. That house sparkled in sunlight. It was designed to be noticed. And I knew, eventually, they'd see it. It happened on a Sunday afternoon in June, almost 4 months after I'd moved in. Jamie was hosting a barbecue for Lily's 3rd birthday, and I was invited, though I hadn't said for sure if I'd come. I'd planned to stop by for a bit, mostly out of curiosity, not obligation, to drop off a present for my niece and make an appearance just long enough to be polite. But before I even got there, I got the text from Jamie, sent at 1:47 p.m., "Is this your house?" Followed by a blurry photo taken from the end of my block, showing the distinctive stone facade and circular driveway. My parents must have driven past it on their way over to her place, probably thinking, who the hell owns that place? Only to recognize my car in the driveway, the same Toyota they'd teased me about keeping for so long. At what point does it become a classic, son? I waited a moment before responding, savoring the knowledge that they were all sitting there, probably at Jamie's kitchen island, staring at their phones and waiting for my reply. "Yeah," I typed simply. "Just moved in last month." A small lie, it had been 4 months, but I wanted them to think this was new, sudden, a bolt from the blue rather than something I'd been working toward for years. Silence for a full 3 minutes. Then, "Why didn't you say anything?" I typed, paused, and then deleted what I really wanted to say. "Would you have cared? Would you have helped me move like you did, Jamie? Would you have bought me a housewarming gift that wasn't an afterthought?" Instead, I just replied, "You told me I'd figure it out." Because I had. And now the house stood there like a cathedral to every sleepless night, every missed weekend, every sacrifice I made in the dark, a towering, echoing response to all the years they spent pretending I didn't need anything because I was strong, because I was independent. I didn't need to gloat. I just had to wait. I didn't go to Lily's birthday party. I sent a text claiming a last-minute work emergency, promised to drop her gift off another time. In reality, I sat on my back patio with a glass of whiskey I could now afford, watching the sunset reflect off my pool, and waited for the fallout. I didn't have to wait long after Jamie's barbecue for the shift to begin, that subtle realignment in the air when people suddenly realize you're not the underdog anymore, not the afterthought or the background noise they can safely ignore. It started with a phone call from my mother 2 days after the barbecue, her voice unusually soft, almost hesitant, like she didn't quite know how to step into this new version of the story where I wasn't the struggling son scraping by in the shadows. She opened with small talk, asked if I liked the neighborhood, if the move went smoothly, if I needed any help decorating, as if I hadn't been living there for months already, as if she was offering assistance that had never been on the table before. I let her talk, let her stretch out the silence between questions, but when she finally circled around to the real question, her voice dipped just a little, losing the practiced casualness she'd been maintaining. "Ethan," she said, clearing her throat slightly. How did you afford that place?" I paused for a moment, just long enough for her to feel it, just long enough for the question to hang between us like smoke in still air. "I figured it out," I said simply. That was all I gave her. No breakdown of my investments, no speech about hard work and determination, no monologue about the sacrifices they never saw and the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering why I wasn't enough for them. Just 4 words, plain and clean, tossed back at her like a stone in a pond, letting the ripples speak for themselves. From there, things began to shift in small but unmistakable ways. Suddenly, I was getting invitations to lunch, to family dinners, to holiday plans I hadn't been included in for years. My father called to ask about that stock tip you mentioned, though I'd never given him investment advice. My mother sent texts checking in, asking how I was doing, her messages peppered with emojis she'd never used before. Jamie's voice had changed too, though she tried to hide it under a thick layer of smugness that had always been her safety blanket. At Thanksgiving, while we were gathered at her house, still the default location for family events, and everyone pretended not to notice the tension running under every conversation, she cornered me in the kitchen while I was refilling my wine glass. "So," she said, leaning against the counter with forced casualness, "must be nice to finally catch up." Her smile was tight, her eyes assessing me in a way they never had before, as if trying to spot the trick, the illusion that allowed her older brother to suddenly surpass her. I smiled slowly, wine bottle still in hand, and looked her in the eye. "Sure," I said. "Nice to catch up." But we both knew the truth, I hadn't caught up. I had passed her, left her in the dust of a race she didn't even know we were running. Her house, once the crown jewel of family accomplishment, now looked quaint in comparison to mine. Her life, once the standard by which success was measured in our family, now seemed small. What nobody in that room understood was that I hadn't done all this for the house. The house was a means, not the end. I did it for this moment, when everything would start shifting in my favor, when they'd have to rewire their entire family narrative around the reality they'd chosen to ignore for so long. They had told themselves I didn't need help because I was strong, independent, resilient, but the truth was far simpler. I wasn't convenient. Jamie was easier to love, easier to support, easier to mold into their version of success. I was complicated, sharp-edged, stubborn, and unwilling to shrink myself just to make them comfortable. So they left me to figure it out. And now that I had, they didn't know what to do with me. My father started asking questions too, casual, curious, but always with that undercurrent of awe he couldn't quite mask. How did I learn about real estate? Did I have a financial advisor? What kind of return was I getting on my investments? Had I considered diversifying into foreign markets? I answered sparingly, always polite but never giving too much. Just did some research, I'd say. Talk to the right people. Let them wonder. Let them stew. Because for the first time in my life, I was holding the power, and I wasn't about to give it away. And yet, beneath all the surface tension and polite smiles, something darker was brewing. I could sense it before anyone said a word, something tight in my mother's voice when she called to cancel lunch plans, something clipped in the way my dad talked about market fluctuations and tight spots. Jamie looked more exhausted every time I saw her, dark circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. Mark's shoulders seemed permanently hunched, his eyes holding a kind of fear he didn't know how to express. It wasn't until Christmas Eve, when we were all gathered at Jamie's again, because, apparently, my mansion was still too uncomfortable a setting for family tradition, that the truth slipped out in a whisper I wasn't supposed to hear. "We're going to have to sell," my father said to my mother in the kitchen, his voice low but not low enough to escape my ears as I stepped in to grab another beer from the fridge. They were standing close together by the sink, their backs to the doorway, heads bent in conference. "What about the condo?" she asked, voice frantic though hushed. "Can't we keep that at least?" "It's gone," he replied flatly. "The market ate it. And the annuity, don't even ask." I stood in the hallway, frozen for just a bit too long, feeling the weight of those words settle over me like dust on glass. Financial ruin. It had finally found them, the people who had always seemed untouchable, who had always had enough to help one child while dismissing the other. And it was only a matter of time before they turned to me, before they came knocking not with smiles but with open palms. And I already knew exactly what I'd say. The call came exactly when I expected it would, right at that perfect moment when desperation had set in just enough to strip away whatever pride they had left, but not so much that they were ready to face the consequences of their own choices. It was a Tuesday evening in February, cold and dark by 5 o'clock, the kind of night that makes you grateful for central heating and a roof over your head. I was in my home office, a room I'd set up with a custom desk and ergonomic chair that cost more than my first month's rent in that moldy apartment, when my phone lit up with my mother's name. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it, thinner somehow, as if years of certainty and comfort had been drained from it in a matter of months. She asked how I was doing first, her tone overly sweet, forced in a way that made my stomach tighten with the anticipation of what was coming next. She had never called just to chat before, never made a habit of checking in unless there was something she needed. And now, after all these years, she was finally ready to need me. I let her talk, let her circle around the truth like a vulture trying to pretend it wasn't eyeing fresh prey. But eventually, she got to the point in the way that people do when they have no other choice. They were losing the house, she said, her voice breaking on the word losing as if she couldn't quite believe it herself. Their savings had dried up faster than they expected, and the market had turned against them in a way they hadn't predicted. My father had made some risky investments, ones that were supposed to pay off in their retirement years, providing them with the comfortable cushion they had always taken for granted. But instead, those investments had collapsed under them like a faulty foundation, leaving them scrambling for solid ground where none existed. The condo in Florida they'd bought as a vacation property, something I'd only learned about through Jamie's Instagram posts of her family enjoying mom and dad's beach place, had been foreclosed on. Their retirement accounts had been depleted by a combination of bad timing and worse advice. I waited, letting the silence stretch just long enough for her to feel the weight of what she was asking before she finally said the words I had known were coming since that night I overheard their conversation in Jamie's kitchen. "Ethan," she said, voice breaking just a little, the way it never had when I was a child seeking comfort. "We need a place to stay." I felt it then, that slow burn of satisfaction curling in my chest like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for years, waiting for this exact moment to finally catch and consume everything in its path. I could picture them sitting at the dining room table, staring at bills they couldn't pay, panicking over a future they had never prepared for, because they'd always assumed things would work out, just as they'd assumed I would figure things out on my own. And I wondered if they had even hesitated before calling me, or if they had simply assumed I would say yes because that's what family was supposed to do. As if the word family was a magic spell that could erase years of disparity, of calculated neglect, of deliberate inequality. "We raised you, honey," she continued when I didn't immediately respond, and I could hear it now, that last-ditch effort to guilt me into forgetting every time they had turned their backs on me, every time they had chosen Jamie's comfort over my survival. We're family. Family. The word felt cheap coming from her mouth, like something borrowed, something she had never valued until she needed it to mean something. I took a slow breath, steadying my voice, letting it sink in, every ounce of resentment, every bit of bitterness, every lesson they had forced me to learn alone. You're independent, I said, voice calm, steady, unshaken. Silence on the line, the kind of silence that feels like a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. You'll figure it out. It landed exactly the way I wanted it to, cutting through whatever illusion of obligation they had been clinging to, shattering whatever hope they had built up that I would step in and save them. I heard my mother inhale sharply as if she had been physically struck, and for the first time in my life, I heard my father, who must have been listening on another extension, as something other than the immovable figure he had always been, a man who had believed himself untouchable, now crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. Ethan, my father finally said, voice tighter than I had ever heard it, as if he still couldn't